"Everything you brought into this suite fits in that bag," Rosalind Carew said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of a woman who had rehearsed the moment. She pulled a silk blouse from Adeline's open suitcase and let it fall across the marble floor of the Carew Grand's presidential suite. "Pick it up and disappear before the board dinner begins." Adeline Mercer Carew, 36, wife of Julian Carew, and daughter of the late real estate magnate Owen Mercer, stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite as another folded garment struck her shoulder and landed near her feet. Through the glass, Newport's harbor stretched pale and still under a November sky. Lawrence Carew, 66, founder and chairman of Carew Properties Group, watched from the suite's sitting room without moving from his chair. Beside him stood Cleo Ashby, 32, director of brand partnerships at Carew Properties and Julian's companion for the past 18 months, her smile practiced and quiet. Julian Carew, 41, Adeline's husband of 8 years and executive vice president of Carew Properties, stood near the suite's writing desk, where his family's attorney, Pemberton Dre, 58, had placed 2 documents on the white lacquered surface. Julian had not looked at Adeline since she'd entered the room. "You don't have to do it this way," Adeline said. "We are doing it exactly this way," Rosalind said, reaching into the case again. Adeline caught her wrist. "Don't touch my things." Rosalind pulled free and scattered the remaining contents across the floor. A blouse came forward fast, and the clasp of Rosalind's bracelet caught Adeline across the cheekbone. Neither woman acknowledged it. Rosalind kicked the empty suitcase toward her. "You married above yourself," Rosalind said. "We let it go on long enough." Julian picked up the pen. He signed the divorce petition without making eye contact with his wife. Then he signed the proposed settlement. Cleo placed her hand against his back while the ink dried. Adeline did not shout. She looked at the scattered clothes, at the documents bearing her husband's signature, at the woman already standing where she had stood. The Carews believed the quiet woman in the simple grey dress had arrived with nothing and would leave the same way. They did not know Adeline was the only child of Owen Mercer, the private real estate billionaire who had built Meridian Property Holdings from a single warehousing company into the largest private commercial real estate trust in the Northeast. They did not know she was Meridian's controlling owner and CEO, or that Meridian held 74% of Carew Properties Group's voting shares, the company Lawrence still introduced at charity dinners as his life's work. 22 months earlier, Adeline had quietly saved Carew Properties from a financing collapse that would have ended the company. 2 major lenders had withdrawn from the Strand portfolio acquisition. Lawrence had borrowed beyond his personal guarantees. Without emergency capital, Carew Properties would have missed payroll for 1,100 employees and triggered debt covenants that would have forced the sale of 7 flagship hotels at a loss. Adeline had authorized Meridian's intervention before sunrise on a Tuesday, restructured the acquisition from the lender side, and ensured that Lawrence's name remained on every press release announcing the deal's success. She had done it while Julian slept. She had done it because she still believed, then, that he was the man she had married. Now he stood with a pen in his hand and watched his mother throw her clothes. Stay with this story, because the woman picking a silk blouse off a penthouse floor is about to walk back through the lobby doors of the hotel her hidden fortune kept standing. 7 weeks before Rosalind opened Adeline's suitcase, the Carew Properties finance team discovered a $14 million construction liability buried inside a contractor amendment approved without independent review. If the lender called the clause, 2 Carew Properties developments would halt simultaneously. 1,100 workers would face immediate uncertainty. Adeline received the alert from Alistair Brent, 54, Meridian's lead independent director and the only Carew Properties board member who knew her true position. The message arrived at 11:40 on a Wednesday night while Julian was traveling. She had assumed it was for work. She called Naomi Rowe, 48, her attorney and trusted counsel since Owen Mercer's death. "Walk me through what Carew needs," Naomi said. "A bridge guarantee on the construction contract. Meridian can backstop the liability before the lender's review window closes." "How much?" $14 million. Maybe 17 if they've missed secondary covenants. Naomi was quiet. "This is the 3rd time in 2 years, Adeline." "I know. Is it worth it?" Adeline looked out at the city. Somewhere below, hotel housekeepers were finishing night shifts at properties that bore the Carew name but ran on Meridian's capital. The employees didn't create the liability. They don't deserve to pay for it. She authorized the guarantee before midnight. By morning, the lender had received Meridian's documentation and agreed to hold. Carew Properties' finance team praised Lawrence's decisive leadership in their weekly report. Julian called from his business trip and said the crisis had resolved faster than expected. He sounded relieved in the easy way of a man who believed rescue came from somewhere outside himself. Adeline had asked once, carefully, whether the trips were producing what he expected. He had said yes. She did not push further. She had learned not to. The invitation to the Carew Properties Fall Investor Gala arrived in her email 4 days later. She had attended every gala for 8 years. This one listed her seating as table 11, near the service corridor, 4 tables behind where Lawrence and Julian would speak. That was the first signal she let pass. The second came at the gala itself. Halfway through the evening, Lawrence's communications director, Orson Webb, 39, directed Adeline away from the group photograph being staged near the Carew Grand's main staircase. The image was for a new leadership campaign, he explained. It featured Lawrence at center, Julian beside him, and Cleo positioned just at Julian's shoulder, her dress a careful shade of ivory. Adeline stood outside the photographer's frame and watched. Julian did not ask Orson to include his wife. He straightened his jacket and looked toward the lens. Later, she found Cleo beside the drinks table, wearing a sapphire pendant on a thin gold chain. Adeline recognized the design immediately. Julian had asked for her help choosing it the previous spring. He said it was a retirement gift for a female board member who had served Carew Properties for 25 years. He had asked Adeline to decide between 2 clasps. She had recommended the simpler one. The pendant was around Cleo's neck, the simpler clasp. Adeline excused herself and found a quiet corridor near the event kitchen. She pressed her back against the cool wall. Knowing how Julian liked hot coffee was not evidence. A pendant was not evidence by itself. But she had chosen that clasp, and she had chosen it for someone who was supposed to be a stranger. She returned to the ballroom and found Julian. He was near the mezzanine stairs, speaking quietly with Cleo. She did not intend to follow them. Then she heard Cleo say her name. She climbed the east staircase to the mezzanine level. The door to the private event room was partly open. "She's still here," Cleo said. "You told me this weekend would be the end of it." "It will be," Julian answered. "Once I sign at the resort and Dad has the board announcement ready, there's nothing left to delay." "And after?" "After, there's nothing keeping us from anything." He kissed her. Adeline stood in the corridor and did not move. She remembered the night Julian had come home, unable to finish his dinner. The way he sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface, the way he had said he didn't know how to carry it all anymore. She had held him there until 2 in the morning. Then she had called Naomi. Then she had authorized Meridian to save his family's company. She had done it quietly, the way she did everything. She turned and went back downstairs. The invitation to Carew Grand arrived the following morning. Lawrence and Rosalind had arranged a family weekend at the resort. The email described it as a private reconciliation gathering. Adeline's room was listed as a junior suite on the 7th floor. Cleo was listed under Julian's suite as a corporate guest. She went because she needed to hear Julian speak without an audience around him. One honest conversation before she decided what came next. What she found was a staged ending. Lawrence's attorney Pemberton Dre had driven up separately with a folder. Rosalind had briefed the resort manager about a schedule change for the private dining room. Everyone arrived knowing what would happen. Everyone except Adeline. She asked Julian to speak privately before the afternoon session. He agreed. On the suite's balcony overlooking the harbor, she told him she had seen him kiss Cleo. He did not deny it. He said the marriage had been hollow for years. He said Cleo understood the pressure he lived under. He said Adeline had always existed at the edge of his life rather than inside it. She reminded him of the night he sat at the kitchen table and told her he was terrified of losing everything his father had built. He said that was not the same as building something himself. She started to answer when the suite door opened and Lawrence and Rosalind walked in with the others. Pemberton placed the petition and the settlement on the desk. Rosalind opened Adeline's suitcase. Adeline gave Julian one final look before he signed. She was not searching for the man she had loved anymore. She was only trying to understand how thoroughly she had misread the person in front of her. His signature took 4 seconds. The hotel's head housekeeper, a woman named Dottie, 55, had positioned herself nearby. Lawrence had dismissed her twice. Both times she returned. When Rosalind was finished, Dottie helped Adeline lift the suitcase without meeting her eye, because she was the kind of person who helped when it was her own job that stood in the way. Adeline's driver, Rennie, 38, who had worked for the Mercer Family Trust for 12 years, was waiting in the lower service lot. He looked at her face when she came through the service entrance. He did not ask anything. He took the suitcase. She was quiet the entire drive back. When the harbor disappeared behind the hill, she pressed 2 fingers to her cheekbone where Rosalind's bracelet had caught her. She had not mentioned it. She had not wanted to give the room a reaction to keep. Rennie's eyes found her in the rearview mirror once. Then he drove. Naomi had pulled the preliminary audit reports by the time Adeline arrived at the Meridian offices. She spread the files across the conference table and stood reading with her arms crossed. "The Strand acquisition backstop," Naomi said. "Yes." "The construction liability guarantee." "Yes." "And the Harmon Street renovation funding from 3 years ago." Adeline sat down. "Yes." The number was not what hurt. What hurt was the pattern behind it. Lawrence had classified resort renovations as Carew Properties operating expenses. Julian had submitted hotel suites shared with Cleo as executive development travel. Pemberton had signed off on guarantees drawn against Carew Properties accounts without proper independent board approval. And through all of it, Meridian's money, Adeline's inheritance, Owen Mercer's life's work, had been filling the gap between what the Carew family spent and what Carew Properties actually earned. She had given her father's capital to protect a company whose leadership treated her as an inconvenience. The man she protected was the man who had just signed her out of his family in front of his parents and his mistress. "Don't use Meridian to punish them," she said. Naomi looked up. "Adeline, protect the company, protect the employees. Let the audit lead wherever it leads." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "But don't make it personal." Naomi was quiet for a long time. "Your father would have said the same thing." "I know." A pause, and then he would have made sure the board met at sunrise. Adeline almost smiled. "Schedule the board." Alistair Brent convened Meridian's independent committee 3 days later. The audit ran for 19 days. Investigators reviewed expense records, travel manifests, contractor invoices, hotel folios, internal approval chains, and 6 years of Carew Properties financial statements. Lawrence had reclassified renovation costs at the Carew Grand as executive hospitality. He had used Carew Properties guarantees to extend personal resort financing without the required independent board approval. He had traveled with private guests on company aircraft and directed his administrative team to describe the costs as client development. He had continued presenting himself as the company's controlling owner at investor events even after Meridian's acquisition had reduced his stake to a voting minority. Julian's records were no cleaner. Emails recovered from his company account showed that Carew Properties' internal finance director had warned him about his father's irregular expense classifications. Months earlier, Julian had told the finance director to let it go until after the board announcement. His approvals on Cleo's travel were dated and detailed. Cleo had submitted brand partnership invoices covering personal hotel stays, jewelry, and private dinners. The descriptions were professionally worded. The underlying records were not. Adeline disclosed her marriage and her ownership position to the independent committee on the first morning. She told them she would not participate in any vote concerning Julian's employment. She asked them to follow the evidence wherever it led. Then she left the room and let them work. The announcement of Carew Properties' new CEO had been scheduled for the opening of the Carew Grand's renovated main lobby. The same renovation Lawrence had funded with Carew Properties accounts without authorization. Lawrence had arranged a full press presence. Julian had chosen his suit 2 weeks earlier. Cleo had planned the photographs. What they did not know was that the independent board had requested the same venue for a different announcement. Adeline arrived with Alistair and Naomi and the Meridian legal team through the main entrance. Behind her walked 4 Carew Properties independent directors. The hotel staff stepped to one side as they passed. Lawrence was already at the lobby's center when he saw her. He pointed. "She doesn't belong at this event." Alistair stepped forward. "She controls it." Lawrence looked at Julian. Julian looked at Adeline. For a moment, the lobby went completely quiet. Alistair addressed the room, including the journalists who had arrived for the CEO announcement, and introduced Adeline formally. As the controlling owner and CEO of Meridian Property Holdings, sole beneficiary of the Owen Mercer Trust, and holder of 74% of Carew Properties Group's voting shares. He explained that Meridian had rescued Carew Properties from financing collapse 22 months earlier, had backstopped a construction liability at significant additional personal cost, and had maintained that position while the company's own leadership treated it as a private expense account. Lawrence said the audit was an attack. He said no institution had the authority to remove a founder. Alistair placed a certified board resolution on the lobby desk in front of him. Lawrence did not take the document. Adeline spoke once directly to Lawrence. You called this your company in every room you entered. You spent its money on your family's convenience and called it leadership. She did not raise her voice. The people who kept this company running deserve better than what you gave them. Cleo looked toward the exit. Lawrence lost his chairmanship under the committee's final resolutions. Civil proceedings to recover improperly expended funds were filed. The Carew Grand, mortgaged against personal guarantees. Lawrence could not cover once the audit surfaced the irregularities, entered lender review, and was sold in a structured process that recovered most of the Meridian capital he had drawn against without disclosure. Julian's termination followed the committee's report. His appeal was reviewed by the same committee, using the same records. The outcome was the same. Cleo's employment ended that same morning. The divorce was finalized under the separate property terms Pemberton had drafted to protect the Carew family from Adeline. Those same terms protected Meridian and the Mercer Trust from Julian completely. The document Pemberton had spent months constructing to keep Adeline out had, in the end, kept her fortune entirely intact. Adeline did not appoint herself to Carew Properties. She recommended Bet Salas 49, the company's longtime chief operating officer, who had managed hotel operations for 14 years without credit and without complaint. Bet became interim CEO. The independent board began the work of rebuilding the governance structures. Lawrence had steadily dismantled. A profit-sharing program for employees was approved in the new fiscal year. One evening, Adeline drove back to the Carew Grand alone. She walked through the main lobby, the same marble Lawrence had paid for with money that wasn't his. The renovation looked beautiful. She had never told anyone she had effectively funded it. She sat at the lobby bar and ordered coffee. The bartender, a young man who had no idea who she was, brought it without sugar and asked how she liked the room. She told him it was a very well-designed space. He said they'd had some changes in management lately. She said she'd heard. He said things seemed to be improving. She agreed that they did. She drove home with the window down despite the cold. She thought about her father, about the afternoon. He had taken her into a property under renovation and pointed to the workers finishing the framing and said that any company claiming to be something was only as credible as the people who showed up every morning and did the job without ceremony. She thought about Julian, on the night he couldn't speak through dinner because he was afraid of losing everything his father had built. She thought about sitting with him until 2 in the morning, holding his hands across the kitchen table while he talked himself through the fear. She thought about the call she had made to Naomi an hour after he fell asleep. She did not regret the call. She did not regret the money. What she mourned was something smaller, the version of Julian who had been afraid enough, once, to be honest. Before ambition made honesty feel like a risk he couldn't afford. That man had existed. She had known him. Accepting who he became did not require rewriting who he had been. She parked outside her building and sat in the quiet for a moment. Her phone showed a message from Alistair confirming the employee profit-sharing enrollment would open the following month. She thought about what her father used to say about power, that real power didn't need strangers to recognize it. That the only people who respected you after learning what you owned had never actually respected you at all. She had hidden everything she was to find out who Julian was without it. She only wished the answer had cost her less. She got out of the car and walked inside. The work that mattered was still ahead, and it had nothing to do with the people she was leaving behind.